Yeah. So Whispers Most Foul is my debut novel. It'll be out in October. It's a thrilling mystery and romance set at a magical university in a fantasy world, which follows the main character Rose, who is the only student at this elite magical university who can't cast a single spell. But as she starts her third year, she realizes that she is the only one who can see the ghosts of some students who have gone missing the previous year, namely one of which who is her academic rival, Sylvie. And as the two have to team up to figure out what happened to Sylvie, whether it's enchantment, is she actually dead, they will tangle with the dark secrets of their university and a lot of mysteries from the past going back to haunt them.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have a great author on the show today, and we're going to be talking about her book, or all of the things that she does in life. How about writing in community? I think that's really important. And I think Emma's going to agree with us on this, and she has some things to share as well. Emma, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. Let everybody, Emma, know where you are in this big world of ours.
I am located just outside of Washington, D.C., in Virginia. And yeah, in a kind of small town farmland, so in the middle of the forest.
Well, there you go. Beautiful. But does your location in the world, does it kind of feed you as an author? Do you kind of write with your surroundings in mind at all?
A little bit, I think, especially with the natural environment. So, as I said, I'm kind of in the middle of the woodlands, and there seems to be a forest in every story that I write. So, I think that comes into play. And also seasonally, I think there's a lot to be said for, when autumn rolls around, things get very atmospheric versus in the heat of summertime, it's a little bit harder to kind of get in the mind frame of writing ghost stories or anything in that vein.
Yeah. So when did all this start for you, Emma? When did you know that you were an author?
An author or a writer, because those are two different
okay, yeah,
answers.
Let's go there. Yeah.
So I've always kind of been a writer. I've always had stories floating around in my head. I think that's a fairly standard answer for most authors, is that we kind of start young, knowing that we have some draw towards creating and writing. And so for me, that was when I was, 11 or 12, I started actually writing that down. Not good stories, mind you, but that is when I started. And when I knew that I wanted to pursue becoming an author and having my work published, I think that was always a dream that I had, especially when I was younger in college and everything, around 18. But that's definitely something I committed a lot more time and effort to in the last 5 years or so. So probably just before COVID. And then what else did you have to do during COVID except, stay inside, and writing is a very safe social distancing hobby. So
right. I'm always kind of curious to see where people draw from, because I think as we pull from different authors and writers, little elements of their craft and who they are kind of feed their way into us. I'm a musician, so I can hear pieces of different bands and music and artists as I kind of do my stuff. And it's like I'm a mix of all these different components, which makes up my sound, which makes me unique, because I like this and this and this, and someone else likes something different. So we all kind of a mixture of all of our influences combined, right? And it kind of helps to kind of set the stage for who we are as a creative.
Yeah. And I do think it's really important to kind of, in your case, maybe listen widely, but in my case, read widely in my field, because it is good to see what other people are doing. And sometimes that inspires you, or sometimes that kind of points you in a direction where you want to go the exact opposite route. So it's always good to kind of be aware of that and how other people influence you in that way.
It's good. So for you writing, how did you learn how to do all this? Is it all self-taught? Did you have a coach? Did you have somebody in your corner helping?
It is all self-taught, actually. I just kind of started with it. I think I took one creative writing course when I was in college, and that's pretty much the only formal education that I've had in that field. So everything else is just, I've always been an avid reader, so a lot of it is kind of picking up things along the way, and a lot of trial and error, because I do have, obviously, my agent and my publisher, and in the editing process, they'll definitely help towards kind of polishing the story up quite a bit, and also more of the technical side of things. My copy editor is a godsend because I don't know anything about that. So in that way, yeah, I think self-taught, but with a lot of help, especially as I've gotten more into traditionally publishing.
Yeah. When I have authors on the show, some of the common things I hear from authors is a lot of authors write in solitude. They write on their own. I'm picturing a little cabin by the woods, and there's no electricity. You're using candles and writing by candlelight. But it's this kind of romantic view of authorship. But it's very isolating, very lonely. And I think a lot of authors benefit from writing in community and having a team or having people around them. What are your thoughts? Do you prefer one over the other? Do you like both?
Yeah.
Tell me.
Well, I think the actual physical act of writing can be very solitary because sometimes you do need to shut the world out to just get the words out onto the page. But after that, I think community is really, really important in terms of sharing your work. And in the same way that reading widely is so important to being exposed to new ideas, having your work read by others is also equally important, because I think this industry is one of a lot of rejection and critique, and being able to share that on a smaller scale with people that you know and trust to begin with makes that entire process so much easier. And then you also have people in your corner when the going gets tough, because again, in this industry, there's a lot of, it's a bit of an emotional roller coaster sometimes, and having people who understand that and who understand your work and are your friends is incredibly beneficial, I think.
Yeah. Is it intimidating to put your work in front of somebody for the first time and get
For
feedback?
sure, yeah.
Yeah. What was it like for you when it happened to you when you did that first time?
Gosh, it was so long ago. To be fair, the first book that I ever wrote was not a good book. I started writing it when I was 17 or 18, and I think I shared it for the first time when I was about 20. So looking back on it now, it's a little bit cringeworthy because I have to sit with the fact that I shared that very awful piece of work with people, but it was also a very valuable experience and it taught me a lot. I think it was very nerve-wracking and vulnerable to share something that is so close to your heart and that you've worked really hard on, and open it up to other people saying, I think you could fix this here, or I'm not really feeling the story here. I don't really like this character. Because you do get attached to these things, but I think that is a very necessary part of the growth process in writing, is opening yourself up to that and actually taking it to heart and making changes. Although there is, of course, a balance between, taking in that critique and changing everything that I think every author kind of has to find for themselves.
Yeah. That second, third, fourth book will never happen if there's no book one. You have to really go through that process and learn how to again, look at your own writing and figure out what works and what's not working. And you realize what you don't know in the process as well, right? So it's a growth thing. So for that person who's struggling delaying book one because they want to be perfect, there's going to be, you have a long road ahead of you, right? So start writing now, really.
I do think, coming up against your inner critic is probably a career-long struggle that most people will face with any creative pursuit, but in this case, writing, because, and I think a lot of times we are our own worst critics. Just you're going to notice so much more than other people are because you're intimately familiar with the work, and I think it's good every once in a while to remind yourself that you are writing a book, and that's not something that everybody does, and you should celebrate those small steps of getting the words on the page, getting it out to other people, share the wins with people and the losses. And I think, it's a process.
What does it feel for you when somebody comes back to you as a reader and they love what you do and they're like, oh my gosh, this is the best book I've ever read. I'm so excited to have this book. What does that feel for you to have great positive feedback?
That's a great feeling. I think it's something that I'm still getting a little bit used to, because again, there's a lot of, especially as you're going through the editing process, there's nothing personal about it. People are just identifying what works for the story and what doesn't. So it's nothing, against you if they're like, this line doesn't really work, or this character, I think, is acting oddly in the scene. So when you're encountering just wholehearted positive feedback for people, or from people who are reading your book, I think that's almost kind of nerve-wracking in and of itself, because I never really know how to respond when people do it, but it's a nice feeling all the same.
Yeah. because I have people come on and they answer that question about authors that they admire, and they're just like, oh, I love this about them, I love this about them, and they really look up to these people as an inspiration. And then I kind of flip it around to them and go, well, how does it feel to know that you could be that same inspiration for someone else? The way you admire that author, there are people who read your books that admire you the same way, would love to spend time with you and talk to you one-on-one and get you to sign their book. Like all of these things, for them, it's a really big deal to have time with their favorite author.
Yeah.
Does that feel odd to know that people think of you in that context?
A little bit, yeah. And I think part of that comes from, as a writer, a lot of times, because again, you have this whole world in your head, right? And you know all of these things about it. And when somebody asks you about your book, I think a lot of authors have this moment of like, do I go with the short, condensed, like curated answer, or do I just, word vomit everything that I know about this book? And I think that's where when people come up and want to know more, it's kind of a new experience for most authors because they're so used to giving the shortened version that most people have the attention span for. And when somebody comes up and they're like, no, I want to know more about this. And how did you create that? And what inspired you to do this? That's something that people kind of have to take a moment and be like, oh, people are genuinely curious now.
Yeah. So that's kind of the idea for this podcast and why I'm doing this show is, Emma, I want people who see your name on this episode and go, oh my gosh, I've got Emma's book right here. And they're like, I get to hear the voice of the author. I've never heard her voice before. I've read her book, but I've never heard her before. And they're pressing play and they're listening to you the first time. And they're like, oh, it's really her. Like they're having a moment right now.
Yeah.
For your community and your readers. Any special message you'd have for them from the author to the reader? What do you want to say to them?
I mean, so many things. I think, for people that are really into the book, it's definitely a story from the heart. And I wrote it for people who have always felt a little bit different or like they don't have a place where they quite belong. So I hope that that's something that people can find in it as they're reading through it. I mean, there's a little bit of mystery and horror in there as well to spook people, but there is genuinely a heartfelt message in there for people as well. And I think for anybody who's starting on this wild journey of writing or getting into traditional publishing, which I can speak a little bit more to than indie publishing since I am in the traditional sphere. Again, I think community is really the most important thing that you can use to build that foundation for yourself, because you're going to have to weather a lot of storms going into it.
All right. So for the readers that haven't heard of you yet, they will by the end of this episode. Tell us about your book. What are we in for as a reader? Let's open that up.
Yeah. So Whispers Most Foul is my debut novel. It'll be out in October. It's a thrilling mystery and romance set at a magical university in a fantasy world, which follows the main character, Rose, who is the only student at this elite magical university who can't cast a single spell. But as she starts her third year, she realizes that she is the only one who can see the ghosts of some students who have gone missing the previous year, namely one of which who is her academic rival, Sylvie. And as the two have to team up to figure out what happened to Sylvie, whether it's enchantment, is she actually dead, they will tangle with the dark secrets of their university and a lot of mysteries from the past going back to haunt them.
Where does the idea come from for this book? Where does it start?
So this one is actually a little bit kind of rooted in my own interests. I mean, I don't know if you can see behind me, but I have a little, my bookshelf and my library set up, and I do kind of have that interest in the dark academia aesthetic. So that was kind of the starting point. And back when I started writing this book, I was talking to my agent at the time about what I wanted to write in the future and what might be good in the market. She was like, dark academia, it really is your vibe and you could make something out of that. And so we started brainstorming what that would look like, and it kind of snowballed from there.
Okay. So for this, then, like, who would be your ideal reader? What's the age range? Kind of like, who are you envisioning as a reader for your books when you're writing?
So this book is technically classified as adult, but it does fall more into the new adult kind of age range. The main character is 20, 21. So I would say, anywhere from 18 to 25 would maybe be the best readership. I would definitely, for younger readers, I would say tread carefully because there are some spookier elements included in the story. I had an adult friend of mine who had to read it with the lights on, so there is a little bit of horror in there. So people who are interested in horror, fantasy, romance, it kind of blends all of those together in a magical setting. So anybody who's kind of into magic with a touch of horror, I guess, would be the best way to sum that up.
So how difficult is it to create the world around your book? All of the character development, the world development, what part of that is easy for you? What's hard?
So I guess I'm kind of lucky in that sense because I love coming up with world building. I am the type of author who occasionally people have to say, like, we don't need all of these details. Like, I know so much about this world that I've created, and I have all of these details that will never make it into the book. So for me, that's something that I've always loved. When I start a book, I really love to come up with a language and culture for the area that I'm writing in, as well as as I'm building the characters. And I kind of like to let the characters and the language and the culture and the magic system all inform each other as I'm building it. I'm really into making maps for my worlds and just getting really immersed in what I'm creating, I think.
Not all, even though the reader might not see all those elements, they all feed into the writing process for you.
Yes, yeah. And I think so this story takes place in a larger world that I've created, that I have other stories hopefully planned for in the future to take place in that same world. So I think there's going to be an element of it that I really want it to feel quite lived in and authentic, as, it genuinely is stepping into a new world instead of just, a setting in the background kind of thing.
So unpack for us a little bit more about your main character. Tell us more.
So Rose, besides not being able to cast a single spell, she is a bit of a lone wolf, but not necessarily by choice. She is very ambitious in her academic career, where she can't cast spells. She makes up for academically. And so that actually kind of informs her rivalry with Sylvie, who she gets partnered up with throughout the book, who is naturally talented, the starcaster of Dunhollow Academy, which is the name of the university. So they're always kind of going head to head. And I think Rose kind of has this outward shell of being kind of what you would expect of a social outcast and a quiet bookworm, but she does have this kind of fierceness underneath, and not in the sense that she wants to go out and fix the world and all its problems. She's very much a product of her environment, but I think throughout the story you get to see her going from this very skewed worldview of the way that things are at her university to kind of embracing a version of herself that is more true to what she wants to be.
At any point during the writing process, did Rose guide you as the character as you write?
I think there's something where once you start writing these scenes, I get a sense for what the characters would say in the moment and how they would react to it. So in that sense, I think, yes, she did kind of become this very real entity for me, not necessarily, whispering in my ear with advice on what she would do in any scene. But during the process, I definitely got to be very familiar with her. Although I do always joke that if I ever got to meet any of my characters in real life, I probably would not survive the encounter because I put them through quite a lot. And they all have, except maybe Rose, they all have quite a lot of magical power as well. So I would not fare well.
You actually kind of stole my thunder there, because my next question was, if you had the opportunity for Rose to walk into your room there with you, sit down with you for a few moments, apart from falling off your chair.
I might just leave the room.
You might just leave me. Is there a question that you don't know the answer to that Rose could answer?
Oh, gosh. About the world?
Yeah, about anything to do with her? Yeah.
Gosh. That's a great question. I've never thought about that before. At this point, I don't know if there would be anything that I don't know about her as a character. But I think kind of maybe if she was put into a scenario that never happens in the book, so something that's very lighthearted and funny, or just she tripped and fell and kind of like people started laughing. I don't really know what she would do in that scenario, like, because that is not something that she ever, or if she went to, a comedy show, like what her reaction would be, because that's not something she ever does in the story. So I think there are definitely areas yet undiscovered about her. But yeah, for the most part, I've had to spend a lot of time thinking about how she would think and what she would say and what she would do. So yeah.
I'm always curious because you spend a lot of time as an author in Rose's world. She doesn't spend as much time equally in your world. So things could be quite different for her to walk into your life and see you as the author, the creator of her story. I'm sure she'd have questions for you as well.
I don't know if she'd have questions, but she would definitely have complaints.
Complaints? Okay. See? Now that's a good teaser for the book. See, that's what I like, because people are like, oh, I want to know more about that.
Yeah. While I did say that the story is heartfelt, that doesn't mean that it's heartwarming. I will just say that.
Okay.
There's a lot of both metaphorical and physically literal creeping into dark corners and, uncovering dark secrets. And there's a lot of darkness in the story, I guess. So I am the type of author that likes to put my characters through the ringer a little bit. So again, I don't think any face-to-face meeting with my characters would go particularly well for me.
Well, there you go. That does give a lot of context. So for your characters as well, did you kind of have everything mapped out at the beginning? Did you kind of was it just kind of falling into place as you wrote the book? Like, how detailed were you at the beginning of writing the novel?
So a little bit of both in this case, because I did write this book on a much shorter timeline than I normally would. Most other books take me a couple of years to come out with, and this one I wrote in 7 months. So at the beginning, I did try to I love coming up with these character sheets, and they include everything from hair color, face shape, eye color, skin tone, to their emotional wounds, the emotional arc that the character goes on, the lessons that they learn throughout. So it really is just kind of a cheat sheet for everything about this character. And I did do that a little bit with the characters in this book, but there was a little bit of finding out as I was writing the things that made the most sense for them just because of that timeline. But yeah.
Was there any characters that just showed up out of nowhere as you're writing? You're like, oh, this person just entered the room. Let's add them to the story.
I would say Rose's best friend in the story, his name is Fen. He very much kind of did that. I had like one idea about him that kind of just came to life and I rolled with it. And he tends to be everybody's favorite character. So that's kind of funny. I didn't put as much thought into him. I just kind of wrote him out and saw what would happen in each scene. And everybody seems to love him the most. To be fair, he is a very charming social character. So he's probably the one bright spot in the whole story, just as a character and as a whole. So that might be why everybody likes him so much. But
interesting. Yeah. Did that shock you then to have that happen in the book?
No, I think I did want, because his characterization is that everybody at the university likes him. He's one of the few people, or rather the only person at the university who is sincere in pretty much everything he does, because the university is set up as this very kind of pretentious, performative place where everybody kind of has their mask on all the time, and they never really say what they truly want or what they truly feel. And Fen kind of throws that all into the wind, and does that very much so. So I think once he started kind of coming to fruition for me, I very much wanted to set him up as that kind of contradiction to everything that the reader is being told about Dunhollow. Like, there is this one character who isn't a terrible person, kind of, so to speak.
Does the university represent an actual place for you or a time?
No, it more so, again, it kind of, the setting was determined by the dark academia genre of the book.
Yeah.
But I think the university is meant to kind of explore power and the corrupt systems that it can create, and how that trickles down to all aspects, whether on a broader scale like the university itself, or the interpersonal relationships that we get to see between the characters and how they carry that with them and in everything that they do, essentially.
Okay. Well, this is fascinating. Okay, you said the book's coming in October, is that right?
Yes. So it'll be out October 10th in the UK and October 15th in the US and Canada.
In time for Halloween.
Yes. Yeah. So they timed that perfectly.
Mm-hmm. What kind of tips do you have for authors that are listening around promoting their new books, getting out there into the community? You're doing a podcast, so that's great.
Yeah.
What else is an opportunity that you see for authors to leverage when they're launching their books?
Well, at the risk of repeating this ad nauseum, I do think community is really important there. Finding your kind of your people and the people who will uplift you. For example, when I got to announce my book, my writing friends were the first ones in my mentions and tagging me and reposting, retweeting, all of that. And I think that can be very valuable because announcing your book to the world can be a little bit scary because you never really know if people are going to be like, oh, okay, and nobody reacts, or it's going to be the next big thing and everybody reacts. Like it is such a 50-50 chance really for most people. And I think having that community there to both promote as well, because those your writing friends will honestly end up being your biggest cheerleaders. And I think I keep saying this as like, I don't do anything in return for these people, but it is a very give and take relationship. And I think once you kind of share your work with people, you end up being very connected in a unique way, because for most people, their books are kind of a reflection of their inner self, at the risk of sounding a little too dramatic, but it is something that is very personal for most people. And bonding with others with that most personal tenant being the starting point of a relationship is kind of very different to, I think, how most friendships happen in the world. And I think that carries over when you're promoting and kind of trying to get your book out there.
The whole idea around story and story crafting and all of that. Is there any kind of things that you really hold true to yourself as you write story that kind of frames and guides you as an author?
Could you elaborate a little bit?
I'm just thinking, like, there's so many different, like, there's the traditional hero journey in story. There's like some very familiar ways that people tell story. Didn't know if you have your own slant on that at all.
Yeah. So I think the hero's journey is, generally you want your character starting from really a place of misbelief, something that they fundamentally believe about the world that either ends up changing or being proven wrong in some way, because you really want your character to go on that growth arc, right? You don't want them to be in the same place that they started in. But I also, on a more technical standpoint, I guess, I really enjoy crafting my stories from a 4-act structure rather than a 3-act structure, which helps to break up that, because the middle tends to be the longest part of the book, right? And having it on the 4-act structure definitely helps break that up in, I think, a way that kind of gets rid of that risk of the middle dragging in the story, to keep things very tight-paced. And I say this also writing, a mystery and a thriller, you want things to be a little bit tighter paced. So this isn't going to apply for people who are writing in different genres necessarily, because some stories are meant to be more long-winded and rambling, and that's kind of the nature of them. Not everything has to be action-packed and fast-paced and go, go, go all of the time. But when you're writing, I think a mystery or a thriller or something in that vein, that structure can be very helpful.
During the course of writing, did you have to then take a chunk or an idea out of the story and it's kind of sitting on the shelf and you're going to get back to that part of the story later?
So at the risk of spoilers, there is going to be a sequel to this book that comes out next October, I believe. And so some of the things that I didn't get to explore in this book, I will be exploring a little bit more in depth in book 2, which I can't really talk about too much right now. It has been announced, but it's just, there's still a lot that's going to change about it in the next year. So, but yeah, so for that, I do kind of, I have a habit of any time that I make a significant change to a story, or I need to cut, a chapter or a scene or a character, I keep a folder of all of the cuts that I've made, because I never know when I'm going to be able to go back and add a little bit of something in, especially because in the writing process, you have so many different people looking at it, right? So usually for me, it's I look at it, and then my agent looks at it, and then my editor looks at it, and then, everybody has different opinions. And so what one person might not like, the other person might love. And so you kind of having that still in in reserve for if somebody's like, you know what, actually, we want a little bit more of this. You can just go back into your folders and find what you took out.
I'd love to when an author will do a companion story, maybe a character in one novel who doesn't play a big role, ends up having their own novel in the future. I love those because it's kind of like two stories that are operating on a different time frame, and they overlap each other without having to read one to understand the other. You have this opportunity to explore more of your characters as well.
Yeah, and I think as somebody who chronically loves the side characters more than the main character, I also love that kind of story where, especially if it's a side character that I've really loved in one story, and then they get their own book, I get really excited about that.
Yeah, that's good. It's good. So again, we're going to celebrate the book in October. What other plans do you have between now and book launch to promote the book? And kind of where are you at right now? And we're recording this in the end of July.
Yeah, so I mean, right now, obviously, I'm joining you for your show, so that's a big one. But I am also on social media now. I'm very bad at being consistent with social media, but we're giving it a try for getting the word out that the book is coming out in the next. Oh gosh, it's almost only 2 months now. But yeah, so that's a big platform. So mainly I'm on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter for some updates, or sorry, X now. But yeah, and I have my website that I try to post regular updates on when I have things. So that's kind of the main area that I'm working in right now. And then of course with people in the industry. So there's the whole process of it going through reviews and all of that, where naturally it gets talked about a little bit more leading up to release date. So I am kind of waiting for the weather to cool down a little bit before I start promoting it in earnest, because it's a little hard to convince people to bundle up for a cozy fall murder mystery in the middle of July, at least in the States. So yeah. So hopefully as October creeps closer, that'll be a little easier to do.
It's good. It's exciting. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you.
And I'm glad that you have time to be on the podcast to talk about it all. Any closing thoughts to your community as we kind of wrap up? I'd love for you again to shout out your website so we all know where to go, and we'll have links for that in the show notes, but to your community as well as they celebrate with you between now and October for the launch of the book. Just your thoughts for your community and what you'd like to say to them as we kind of wrap up. Take us to the website first, though.
Yeah. So the website, sorry, do you want me to show it to you? Or?
It's just okay.
Yeah, let me pull that up. It's just my name, emmamacdonaldauthor.com. All right. So this is my website. Fairly simple. I think, for authors, you don't necessarily need to have something bright and flashy, but this is just so yeah, all of the information there. You can read the synopsis there if you want a slightly more curated, better description than what I gave you a few moments ago. And then I have my contact form up. If anybody is interested in reaching out to me, they can go ahead and send a message through this. That'll go straight to my author email, so I can answer people and get in. I also love when people reach out to me, if they're reading the book. I love hearing from them on social media and stuff. I've had a lot of people do that so far, and that's been really lovely. So yeah.
Excellent. So tell us again why the idea behind the title of your book as well.
So this is, do you mind if I stop sharing my screen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So it actually came up, originally I was going to call it Foul Whisperings, I think. And because it was in the dark academia genre, that was a little bit of a nod to Shakespeare's Macbeth. And a quote in there, even though the book does not have anything to do with Shakespeare, so don't worry. But and then that over time kind of morphed into Whispers Must Foul from there. And then the sequel that will be out next year is called Whispers Most Deadly, to kind of stick with that theme.
Nice, excellent. A lot of whispers going on, which is great. But I'm really happy that you're here on the show, and I would love for you to come back and celebrate in the future. Book 2 comes out.
Come back. I'd love to come back.
Let's get an update and celebrate. I'd love for you to keep us in mind, okay? And we'll have links for everything in the show notes as always. But yeah, what's your closing thought for your community? What would you like to say to all those supporters who've been there for you, giving you all this love and help in your journey? What do you want to say to them?
Well, I think first off, thank you to anybody who reads this book or reviews it or promotes it in any way, I like from the bottom of my heart, I cannot thank people enough for doing that. It is a very surreal thing for me as an author to actually have my book going out into people's hands, whether you borrow it, buy it, trade it with your friends. I think that's incredibly valuable to me. But I also think that, you know, one of the big takeaways, if you're reading the story, is how important it is to be authentic to yourself and stay true to yourself. And I think that's something that hopefully will stick with a lot of people as they go through the story. So
it's amazing. I love it, Emma. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, of course.
Again, we'll have links for everybody in the show notes. Everyone can go and click through and go and check out Emma's website. When you buy the book, please leave a great review for Emma. So not only Emma, but also other people thinking about buying this book will know why you love it. Go beyond the great book, great author. Let's get a little more detailed in our reviews, everyone. And that way people will read that and know that this is the right book for them. As well, when you buy one, buy two, because then you can send one to your friends and family because they're going to want to read it as well. So we're going to sell lots of books, Emma. That's the idea, okay? We're going to sell a lot of books.
I'm here for it.
All right. Emma, again, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun. Well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening.